Hello, and welcome back to Noir Lullaby. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy chilling tales that sing like a dark lullaby, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, Hey. I do not really know how to begin this, and I am not even sure anyone will believe me, but I have to tell someone what is happening. I tried talking to people I know, but they all look at me like I am sick, confused, or dangerous. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am losing my mind. But there are things happening around me that do not feel like memory problems. They feel like something else. Something impossible. My name is Mike. I am 43 years old, single, and as far as I have always known, completely alone. My parents are both dead. I have one brother named Andy, but we have not spoken in about 12 years. We used to be close, but after our mother died, we had a terrible argument. Too many old feelings came out at once, and neither of us knew how to take back the things we said. I moved away, he moved to Missouri, and that was the end of it. I thought about calling him many times, but pride always stopped me. I was married once. Her name was Monica, and she was the love of my life. Even now, after all these years, it hurts to write her name. Monica worked as a nurse. She often had late shifts at the hospital, and I used to wait up for her no matter how tired I was. Sometimes she came home at 2 a.m, smelling like soap, coffee, and hospital air. She would drop her shoes by the door, sit beside me on the couch, and tell me stories about her night. She never shared private details about patients, but she always found a way to make me laugh. She could make even a terrible day sound warm and human. 15 years ago, she was driving home after one of those late shifts when a semi-truck ran through a red light and hit her car. She died at the scene. The police officer who came to my door kept using soft words. He said things like impact, instant, and she did not suffer. I remember watching his mouth move, but I could not understand what he was saying. It felt like he was speaking through water. I kept thinking Monica would walk up behind him and ask why there was a police car outside. She never did. After she died, something inside me shut down. I still went to work. I still paid bills. I still ate enough food to stay alive. But I was not really living. Every room in the house reminded me of her. Her side of the closet stayed untouched for years. I kept her favorite mug beside the sink. I left her shampoo in the bathroom until the bottle became dusty. I told myself I would throw those things away one day, but I never did. That was also when my memory started getting worse. At first, it was small things. I would forget groceries in the shopping cart and drive home without them. I would leave clean dishes in the dishwasher for days because I thought I had already put them away. Sometimes I walked into a room and forgot why I was there. Once I left my wallet in the freezer. Another time I spent 20 minutes looking for my keys while they were in my hand. I worried about it, but doctors told me stress and grief could do strange things to the mind. I was still able to work, drive, pay bills, and take care of myself. So I learned to live with it. I made lists. I set reminders. I put notes on the refrigerator. I told myself that forgetting small things did not mean I was losing everything. But what happened last week was not small. Last Monday morning, I woke up to the smell of eggs and bacon. For one confused second, I thought Monica was in the kitchen. That happens sometimes. A smell, a sound, or a certain kind of morning light would pull me backward in time. I would wake up, and forget she was dead. Then the truth would return, and it would feel like losing her all over again. I lay in bed, listening. Someone was moving around downstairs. I heard a cabinet close. A pan scraped against the stove. Then a man began humming. I got out of bed and grabbed the old wooden baseball bat I kept behind my bedroom door. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. I moved slowly down the stairs, trying not to make a sound. When I reached the kitchen, I saw a man standing at my stove. He was huge. He had to be at least 6'6", maybe taller. His shoulders looked wide enough to block the whole doorway. He wore a gray t-shirt and black sweatpants, and his arms were thick with muscle. His back was turned to me as he cooked eggs in my pan like he had done it 1,000 times. I screamed. It was not a brave shout. It was pure fear. The bat slipped from my hand and hit the floor. The man spun around and ran toward me. "What is it, Dad?" He sounded frightened. I backed away until I hit the wall. "Dad?" I said. "What are you talking about? I am not your dad." His face changed. Not into anger, but into worry. "Dad, it is okay," he said. "It is me. Eric, you are having an episode again." The word again frightened me more than anything else. He moved slowly, like someone approaching a scared animal. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture. It was a photo of the two of us standing outside my house. His arm was around my shoulders. We were both smiling. I looked older in the picture than I remembered looking, and Eric looked exactly like the man standing in front of me. I stared at the screen for a long time. Something about the picture felt wrong. I could not explain it. The light looked normal. The shadows looked normal. Our faces were clear. Still, it felt like a lie. Then he walked me through the house. There were pictures everywhere. On the living room wall, there was a school photo of him at about 8 years old. On the hallway table, there was a picture of him in a baseball uniform. On the shelf near the stairs, there was a photo of Monica holding a small boy on her lap. I had walked past those places every day, but I had never seen those pictures before. There were birthday cards in a kitchen drawer. Father's Day cards were hidden inside my desk. A box of school awards sat in the closet. There were drawings signed. Love, Eric. There was a baseball glove in the garage with his name written inside it. There were family vacation photos, Christmas photos, and pictures of him standing beside birthday cakes. He even showed me a birth certificate. His full name was Eric Michael Carter. It said he had been born on October 25th, 2006. My name was listed as his father, and Monica's name was listed as his mother. I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs would not hold me. It was impossible. I would not forget having a son. I might forget milk at the store. I might forget why I walked into the bathroom. I might forget a meeting at work. But I would not forget a child. I would not forget 20 years of birthdays, school mornings, scraped knees, arguments, holidays, and late-night talks. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. The worst part was that Eric acted completely normal. He made breakfast. He asked if I had taken my medication. He knew where everything was. He knew the alarm code, the Wi-Fi password, and which cabinet held the coffee. He knew Monica's favorite song. He knew that I hated onions. He even knew about the scar on my knee from when I fell off a bike at 13. Every answer he gave made me more confused. I tried to study him without making it obvious. He looked a little like me around the jaw and forehead, but most of his face reminded me of Monica. His smile looked exactly like hers. That nearly broke me. But there was something wrong with his eyes. He blinked too slowly. It sounds stupid when I write it down, but it was not normal. His eyes would stay open for too long, fixed on me, and then his eyelids would lower in a slow, careful movement. It looked like someone had watched people blink and was trying to copy it. Later that day, when Eric went upstairs, I called my best friend Tom. Tom and I had known each other for over 20 years. He had been at my wedding. He had helped me through Monica's funeral. If I had a son, Tom would know. "Hey, Tom," I said, "I have a weird question. Do you know Eric?" There was a pause. "Your son?" he said. My mouth went dry. I forced a laugh. No, I mean the mailman. Eric, the mailman. He has not been around lately. I thought maybe he got a different route." Tom laughed. "Mike, Mitch has been the mailman in our neighborhood for over 30 years. "Oh," I said. "Right, I must have mixed up the names. I have to go." I ended the call before he could ask more questions. After that, I spoke to neighbors, coworkers, and people I had known for years. I tried to be careful. I asked indirect questions. I mentioned Eric's name and watched their faces. Every one of them knew him. My neighbor, Mrs. Hall, said Eric had carried groceries into her house the week before. A coworker asked if Eric was still working at the gym. Another friend told me Eric had been one of the tallest kids on his high school baseball team. No one hesitated. No one looked confused. They all acted as if Eric had always been part of my life. By that evening, I was exhausted. I began to wonder if I really was sick. Maybe my memory loss was worse than I thought. Maybe I had hidden it from myself. Maybe there were whole years missing from my mind. Eric sat with me in the living room and explained things I could not remember. He told me about baseball games, school events, birthday parties, vacations, and father-son camping trips. He described a Christmas when he was 10 and I accidentally burned the turkey. He told me about the time he broke his arm after falling from a tree. He remembered me teaching him how to drive. I remembered none of it. Then, after a long silence, he asked, "What was Mom like?" I was only 5 when she died. The question hurt in a way I was not ready for. I looked at him, and for a moment I saw Monica in his face again. "She was the kindest person I ever knew," I said. "She was beautiful, but she never acted like she knew it. She cared about everyone. She could talk to people when they were scared and make them feel safe. We used to go to the beach and spend hours reading. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat there." Eric listened closely. "I will never forget the day I met her," I continued. "We were in 9th grade. She was the new girl from Boston. I saw her sitting alone at lunch, so I sat beside her. Neither of us had an easy childhood. We both grew up poor. We both had people in our homes who hurt us. I think we recognized something in each other. We wanted a better life, and we believed we could build it together." My throat tightened as I remembered those early years. "And we did," I said. "For a while, we really did." Eric looked down at his hands. "Did she love me?" he asked. The question should have been easy, but I did not know the answer. I had no memory of Monica holding a baby, singing to a child, or speaking his name. "Still," I said, "yes, I know she loved you." He smiled with Monica's beautiful smile. Then he asked, "Can I see more pictures of her?" I told him I had an old photo album locked in a box upstairs. I kept that album hidden because looking through it hurt too much. Every picture was a doorway to a life I could not return to. The album had a small metal lock. and I kept the key taped beneath the bottom drawer of my dresser. I do not know why I hid it so carefully. Maybe I wanted to protect the memories from time. Maybe I wanted to protect myself from them. Eric and I sat at the kitchen table and looked through the album for hours. I had labeled the pictures by year. There were photos from high school, college, our first apartment, our wedding, and every year after. I told Eric stories about Monica. I showed him the beach where I proposed. I showed him the tiny apartment where the heater broke every winter. I showed him a picture of Monica laughing in the rain. At first, I was too lost in the memories to notice what was missing. Then I realized Eric was not in any of the pictures. He was not there as a baby. There were no pictures of him as a toddler. He was not present at Christmas, birthdays, vacations, or family dinners. There was nothing that showed he had ever been part of our lives. I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe the album was only for pictures of Monica and me. Maybe the family pictures were stored somewhere else. Maybe I had locked the album away before Eric was born. Then, we reached the year 2006. I stopped turning the pages. There were pictures of Monica from January, March, June, August, September, October, November, and December. She was never pregnant, not even close. I found photographs taken on October 25th, 2006. The exact date written on Eric's birth certificate. Monica and I were eating dinner at a small Italian restaurant. The date was printed on the backs of the pictures. She wore a fitted red dress, and her stomach was completely flat. There was no baby bump. There was no sign that she had recently given birth. There was no way Eric could have been born that day. I looked up at him. He was watching me. His eyes stayed open for several seconds too long. Then he blinked slowly. I closed the album and told him I was tired. Eric asked if I was all right, and I told him I was fine. That night, I locked my bedroom door and pushed a chair beneath the handle. I barely slept. The next morning, Eric told me he was going to work. He said he would be back around lunch. I waited until I heard his car leave. Then I called my brother. I had not spoken to Andy in 12 years, but he was the only person I could think of who might know the truth. Andy had been at my wedding. He had been at Monica's funeral. After she died, I lived with him for almost 2 years because I could not stay alone. If Eric had been 5 when Monica died, then he would have lived with Andy, too. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. Hello, Andy? There was silence. Andy, it is Mike. Another pause followed. Mike? He said. His voice changed. I never thought I would hear from you again. I closed my eyes. It was him. He sounded older, but he was still my brother. I am sorry, he said quickly. I got a new phone and did not have your number saved. How are you? Is everything okay? I wanted to apologize for the last 12 years. I wanted to tell him I missed him, but there was no time. Andy, I need to ask you something. All right. Do you know my son? He laughed once, sounding confused. You had a baby and did not tell me? My heart began pounding. How old is he? Andy asked. I have to meet him. 20, I said. The line went silent. What? He whispered. Before I could say more, the front door opened. Eric walked in. I have to go, I said quickly. I will call you back. I ended the call. Eric stepped into the kitchen carrying a gym bag. Who was that? He asked. Just your uncle. My uncle? Andy, oh, Eric said. For 1 second, his smile disappeared. Then it returned. I only came home to grab lunch, he said. I will be back later. Love you, Dad. I could barely speak. Love you too, Eric. He stood still for a moment, watching me. Then he left. As soon as his car disappeared, I called Andy back. A recorded voice told me the number was no longer in service. I tried again, but the same message played. I checked my recent calls. Andy's number was gone. The call had vanished from my phone. I searched for him on Facebook. His profile was gone. I checked Instagram, but there was nothing. I searched his full name, his old job, his city, and every username he had ever used. There was no sign that Andy existed. I ran upstairs and opened the boxes where I kept family photographs. The day before, I had looked through some of them. Andy had been in several pictures. There was one of us as children standing beside our father's truck. Another showed Andy at my wedding. Another showed him with his arm around me after Monica's funeral. Now, I was alone in every picture. In the childhood photo, I stood beside the truck by myself. At the wedding, there was empty space beside me. At the funeral, no one had an arm around my shoulders. Even my parents' old family album showed only one child. Me, I began shouting Andy's name. I do not know why. Maybe I thought the house would remember him. I called Tom. I called neighbors. I called old friends from school. No one knew who Andy was. Some of them told me I had always been an only child. Others became uncomfortable and asked if I had taken my medication. I packed a bag and left before Eric came home. I did not know where else to go, so I drove to Andy's old address in Missouri. It was a 14-hour drive. I stopped only for gas and coffee. I kept checking my mirror, expecting to see Eric's car behind me. During the drive, I began to question every memory I had. Was Andy real? Was Monica real? Was I even Mike? I repeated facts out loud to keep them from disappearing. My name is Mike Carter. I am 43. Monica was my wife. She died 15 years ago. Andy is my brother. Eric is not my son. I said the words again and again until my throat hurt. When I reached Missouri, I found the road where Andy used to live. His house was gone. There was only an empty field. There was no driveway, mailbox, broken foundation, or sign that a house had ever been built there. I asked a man at a nearby gas station if there had ever been a house on that land. He said the field had always been empty. I drove to a hotel and rented a room under a fake name. I closed the curtains, locked the door, and pushed the desk against it. Then I turned off the lights and sat on the bed. That was 3 days ago. About 2 hours after I arrived, someone knocked on the door. "Hey, Dad," Eric said from the hallway. "Let me in." I froze. He had found me. "Dad, it is Eric. You are having an episode." His voice was calm. He did not sound angry. He sounded worried, almost kind. I did not answer. He knocked again. "Please open the door. I want to help you." Every few seconds, another knock came, followed by the same words. "Hey, Dad, let me in. It is Eric. You are having an episode." At first, I called the front desk. A woman answered and said no one was standing outside my room. I told her to check the hallway camera. She said the camera showed an empty hall. Still, the knocking continued. I called the police. 2 officers came to the hotel. I heard them speaking outside my door. They checked the hall and found no one. When I finally moved the desk and opened the door for them, the hallway was empty. The officers asked if I was taking any medication. One of them suggested I go to a hospital. I refused. The moment they left, the knocking started again. For 3 straight days, it never stopped. Every few seconds, there was another knock, followed by Eric's calm voice telling me he was my son and that I was having an episode. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I used the bathroom only when I could no longer wait. I sat with my back against the wall and watched the door. Sometimes the handle moved. Sometimes the wood bent inward, as if something enormous was leaning against it. But Eric never shouted. He never threatened me. He only sounded patient. That made it worse. Then, about an hour ago, the knocking stopped. The silence felt so sudden that my ears began ringing. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and finally 30. I thought maybe he had finally gone. Then someone knocked again. This time, there were 3 soft, gentle taps. The voice outside was no longer Eric's. "Come on, Mike," it said. "We are going to miss Andy's wedding. Hurry up." I dropped my phone. It was Monica's voice. It was not similar to her voice. It was not close. It was perfect. It had the same warmth, the same soft Boston accent she always tried to hide, and the same little laugh at the end of certain words. I have dreamed about her voice for 15 years. I have replayed old recordings just to hear her say my name. I know that voice better than I know my own. She knocked again. "Mike, sweetheart, open the door." I am sitting on the floor now, staring at the handle. I do not know what is real anymore. Maybe Eric really is my son and my mind erased him. Maybe Andy never existed. Maybe Monica is alive. Maybe I died in that crash instead of her. Maybe nothing outside this room is real. But if there is even the smallest chance that she is standing on the other side of this door, I cannot leave her there. I know this could be a trick. I know something is wrong. I know Eric had her smile, and I know he blinked too slowly. But Monica is calling my name. She says Andy is waiting. She says we are late for the wedding. Her hand is on the door now. I can see the handle turning a little at a time. I am going to move the desk. I am going to unlock the door. After 15 years of emptiness, after 15 years of waking up alone, I have to see her face again. Even if it is not really her, even if something else is waiting for me, I have to open the door. Story 2. My grandfather lived a very long life. By the time he reached his 90s, everyone in the family had started joking that he might outlive all of us. During the final 10 years of his life, some of us even began making bets about when he would finally pass away. That probably sounds cruel or disturbing, especially to anyone who did not know him. In our family, though, it was never meant in a hateful way. It became a running joke, and no one enjoyed it more than Grandpa himself. Every birthday, someone would bring up the subject. "Another year," my uncle would say. "There goes my money." Grandpa would laugh until he started coughing. Then he would lean back in his chair, wipe his eyes, and tell us we should have known better than to bet against him. Sometimes he even joined the betting. He would choose a date several years in the future and claim he planned to die only after everyone else had lost hope of winning. In the end, no one collected any money. Grandpa lived to be exactly 100 years old. His mind remained sharp until the end. He remembered names, birthdays, old arguments, and tiny details from events that had happened decades earlier. His body, however, became weaker with each passing year. It was painful watching a man who had once walked through forests for days become unable to cross a room without help. His hands shook, his back curved, his skin became thin and pale. and sometimes it looked as if even sitting upright required all his strength. Still, he never complained. Whenever someone asked how he was feeling, he would grin and say, "Still alive." Unfortunately, when he finally died, none of us were surprised. You cannot feel completely shocked when someone reaches an age written with 3 digits. For the most part, our family celebrated his life instead of only mourning his death. There were tears at the funeral, of course. There were also stories, laughter, old photographs, and memories shared over food. Everyone had something they missed about him. My mother missed the way he called her every Sunday morning. My uncle missed the old tools Grandpa had taught him to use. My cousins missed his jokes, even though most of them had heard the same jokes 100 times. I missed all of those things, too. I missed his laugh, his rough voice, and the way he could make any room feel warmer simply by being there. More than anything, though, I missed hearing about his hunting trips. For as long as I could remember, Grandpa had disappeared into the mountains several times a year. He usually stayed away for about a week. Sometimes he returned sooner, and sometimes he stayed a few days longer. He always went alone. The rest of the family did not care much about hunting. My mother hated guns, my uncle found the woods boring, and most of my cousins were more interested in phones and video games. I was different. I loved hearing every detail. Visiting Grandpa after one of his trips became a tradition between us. I would usually go to his house a day or 2 after he came home. He would make a large jug of sweet tea, fry chicken using a recipe he refused to share with anyone else, and sit with me at the kitchen table for hours. Sometimes there would still be dirt under his fingernails. His boots would be near the back door, covered in dry mud, and his hunting jacket would smell of smoke, rain, and pine trees. While we ate, I would ask him how the trip had gone. His face always changed when he began talking about the hunt. His eyes became brighter. His tired shoulders seemed to rise. He would begin speaking softly, almost as if he were telling me a secret. As the story continued, however, his voice would grow louder and more dramatic. He would slap the table, point toward an imaginary place across the room, and act out important moments. One of the bastards almost got away, he once told me. He had a serious expression when he said it, but there was excitement behind his eyes. Hunted him down all week, he continued. Had me climbing hills, crossing streams, and sleeping in the cold. Thought I'd lost the trail twice. Another time, he shook his head and smiled. Finally caught him, he said. Got some nice steaks out of it, too. I always assumed he was talking about deer. It seemed obvious. He was a hunter. His house was full of old rifles, animal skins, and photographs of himself standing beside deer he had killed when he was younger. After every trip, he gave me bags of meat to take home. There were steaks, chops, ground meat, and sometimes strips of homemade jerky. The packages were usually wrapped in plain butcher paper. Grandpa wrote dates on them, but never labeled what kind of meat they contained. I never questioned it. I simply put everything in my freezer and cooked it whenever I wanted a good meal. The meat always tasted rich and slightly different from anything sold at a grocery store. I assumed that was because it was fresh wild game. Grandpa seemed proud whenever I told him I had enjoyed it. "That's good meat," he would say. "Can't get anything like that in the city." It became our special connection. Out of all his grandchildren, I was the only one who wanted to hear the full hunting stories. The others would leave the room or change the subject, but I stayed at the table and listened. Grandpa noticed. Years before he died, He told me that one day his hunting cabin would belong to me. "You're the only one who'd use it," he said. "Everyone else would sell the land before my body got cold." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He was not. After the funeral, when the family met with the lawyer, I learned that Grandpa had left me the cabin, the surrounding land, and everything inside it. My cousins received money. My uncle got Grandpa's truck and tools. My mother received the family photographs and several pieces of old furniture. I received the place Grandpa had guarded more closely than anything else in his life. I could hardly wait to see it. Grandpa had spoken about the cabin many times, but he had never taken me there. I had asked once when I was younger, and he immediately refused. "It's not a place for children," he said. When I became an adult, I asked again. He laughed and told me that I would see it when the time was right. I sometimes wondered why he kept it so private. At the time, I believed it was simply his quiet place. He had lived through wars, raised a large family, worked difficult jobs, and spent most of his life surrounded by noise and responsibility. The cabin must have been where he escaped from everything. Knowing that he wanted to pass that peaceful place on to me made the gift feel even more meaningful. A few weeks after the funeral, I packed food, clothing, cleaning supplies, and some of Grandpa's old belongings into my car. The drive took nearly 2 hours. At first, I traveled through busy neighborhoods and crowded shopping areas. Gradually, the buildings disappeared. The roads became narrower, the traffic became lighter, and houses were replaced by fields and forests. My phone lost service about an hour into the journey. I did not care. The farther I drove, the calmer I felt. Tall trees rose on both sides of the road. Sunlight flashed between the branches, creating bright patterns across the windshield. I passed a few small farms and abandoned buildings, but eventually there was nothing except nature. The final road was little more than a dirt trail. Branches scraped against the side of my car. Loose stones moved beneath the tires, and several times I wondered whether I had taken a wrong turn. Then, the trees opened, and I saw the cabin. For several seconds, I could only stare. It was beautiful. The outside walls were made of dark, stained oak. A handcrafted porch stretched across the front, and a wooden swing hung from thick chains near one corner. A flower bed ran along the entire length of the porch. Despite Grandpa being gone for several weeks, many of the flowers were still alive. Bright yellow, purple, and red blossoms moved gently in the warm breeze. The cabin stood on a rise, overlooking a wide river. Beyond the water, the mountains stretched into the distance. Trees surrounded the property in every direction, making it feel separate from the rest of the world. I finally understood why Grandpa had loved the place so much. There were no cars, no voices, no neighbors, and no sound except birds, insects, and moving water. I carried my bags inside and was immediately surprised by how clean everything was. Grandpa had been 100 years old, yet the cabin looked as if someone had cleaned it that morning. The hardwood floors were polished and almost completely free of scratches. The furniture was simple, but carefully maintained. There was no dust on the tables, and the windows were clear. The air smelled of pine wood, leather, and the cool mountain air drifting through an open window. Animal heads covered the walls. Most were deer, although I also saw a large elk, a wild boar, and what looked like a black bear. Some of the mounts appeared very old. Their glass eyes followed me as I moved across the room. The main room had a kitchen on one side, a heavy wooden dining table in the center, and a large stone fireplace built into the far wall. The fireplace was my favorite part. A wide chair sat beside it, with a small table placed close enough to hold a drink. I imagined Grandpa sitting there on winter nights while snow covered the mountains outside. For a moment, I wished I could light a fire and sit in that chair while remembering him. Unfortunately, it was the middle of summer. The afternoon heat was already filling the cabin, and starting a fire would have made the place unbearable. Instead, I decided to honor him in another way. I unpacked the ingredients I had brought and cooked his fried chicken recipe. At least, I tried to cook it. Grandpa had never written down the exact instructions, so I had spent years attempting to copy the taste from memory. Mine was never as good as his, but that day it came close. I poured a glass of sweet tea and sat at the dining table. Eating that meal alone in his cabin was both comforting and painful. Every small detail reminded me of him. The old hunting coat hanging beside the door, the knife resting on the kitchen counter, the dented metal cup near the sink. Even the chair across from me seemed as if it were waiting for him. I found myself imagining that he had simply gone outside and would return at any moment, carrying his rifle and complaining about the heat. I ate slowly while looking around the room. That was when I noticed the book. It rested on the wooden mantel above the fireplace. The book was thick and covered in dark brown leather. It looked old, but unlike many other objects in the cabin, it did not appear damaged. There was no title on the spine. At first, I assumed it might be a hunting journal. That excited me because Grandpa's stories had always been my favorite part of our visits. Perhaps he had written down details he had never shared with anyone. I took the book from the mantel and returned to the table. When I opened the cover, I saw 2 words written across the first page. Guest book. I frowned. Grandpa had always claimed he hunted alone. He never mentioned bringing friends to the cabin. In fact, he had gone out of his way to stop anyone in the family from visiting. Why would he need a guest book? I turned to the next page. Most of it was blank, except for a single handwritten entry. Mark DeSantis. January 6th, 1973. Stubborn bastard. The handwriting belonged to Grandpa. I recognized the sharp letters and the unusual way he formed the number 7. I stared at the entry for a few moments. It did not look like something a guest had written. It looked as though Grandpa had recorded the name himself. I turned the page. Emily Reyes, December 18th, 1976. Quick, but not quick enough. My smile faded. The next page contained another name. David Clifford. February 9th, 1980, nearly reached the river. I looked toward the river through the front window. The water moved quietly below the cabin, shining beneath the afternoon sun. A strange feeling passed through me. I continued turning pages. Every page contained a different name, date, and short comment. Some entries were separated by months. Others were several years apart. Peter Hall, August 12th, 1982, hid for 3 days. Lauren Mitchell, April 27th, 1985, good lungs. Stephen Parker, November 3rd, 1987, begged too much. Rachel Moore, June 19th, 1991, smarter than expected. Thomas Reed, October 8th, 1994, should have stayed off the road. I should have been terrified. I should have closed the book, left the cabin, and called the police as soon as I reached an area with phone service. Instead, I tried to find a harmless explanation. Maybe they were other hunters. Maybe the comments were jokes. Perhaps these people had competed with Grandpa during hunting trips. Maybe they were friends from another part of his life. But the words did not sound friendly. Quick, but not quick enough. Nearly reached the river. Hid for 3 days. Those did not sound like comments written about people who had enjoyed a peaceful weekend in the mountains. I continued reading. The names stretched across decades. Some dates were from before my mother was born. Others were from when I was a child. The final entries had been written only a few years before Grandpa became too weak to travel alone. There were dozens of them, maybe more than 100. I noticed that some pages had small dark stains near the edges. They might have been mud, old ink, or dried blood. I told myself it was probably animal blood. The cabin was used for hunting, after all. Still, I closed the book. The room no longer felt warm and peaceful. The glass eyes of the mounted animals seemed less harmless. The clean floor suddenly appeared suspicious, as if someone had carefully removed every trace of something terrible. I looked down at the half-eaten chicken on my plate, but I had lost my appetite. The silence outside felt different, too. Before finding the book, the lack of noise had been comforting. Now it made me aware of how far I was from anyone who could help me. I walked through the cabin, searching for anything that might explain what I had found. There was a small bedroom, a bathroom, and a storage room filled with hunting equipment. Several rifles rested in a locked cabinet. Coils of rope hung from hooks. There were knives, traps, plastic sheets, and heavy chains. None of those things were unusual for a hunter. At least that was what I kept telling myself. Behind the cabin was a wooden shed. The door was locked, and I did not have a key that fitted. I considered forcing it open, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps, deep down, I already knew that I did not want to see what Grandpa had kept inside. I stayed at the cabin for another hour, but the place no longer felt like a gift. Every sound made me turn around. When branches moved outside the window, I imagined someone running between the trees. When the floor creaked, I thought about people hiding inside the cabin. I placed the guest book in my bag. I was not sure whether taking it was the right thing to do, but I could not leave it there. Then I packed my belongings, locked the cabin, and drove home before the sun went down. For most of the journey, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Nothing followed me. Even so, I did not relax until the forest was far behind me, and my phone finally regained service. That evening, I placed the guest book on my kitchen table. I told myself I would forget about it until the next morning. I could not. The names stayed in my thoughts. One of them bothered me more than the others. David Clifford. I did not know why, but the name felt familiar. I had heard it somewhere, or perhaps read it in an article years earlier. I sat at my computer and searched the name. At first, the results were ordinary. There were social media accounts, business pages, and records belonging to people who were clearly too young. Then, I added the date and the word missing. A newspaper archive appeared. The article had been published more than 6 years earlier. The photograph showed a young man with dark hair and a wide smile. According to the report, David Clifford had been traveling through the Appalachian region when he disappeared. His abandoned vehicle had been found near an isolated road. There had been no sign of a struggle. Search parties spent several days looking through the surrounding forests, but they never found him. The article listed the date he was last seen. February 6, 1980, I looked at the guest book lying beside me. Grandpa's entry had been dated February 9th. 3 days later. nearly reached the river. My hands began shaking. I searched for another name. Emily Reyes. She had disappeared while traveling alone in December 1976. Her family believed she had stopped to help someone on a rural road. Her car was found empty, with the driver's door unlocked. The date she disappeared was only 2 days before the date written in Grandpa's book. Then I searched for Mark DeSantis, missing since January 1973. His body had never been found. One by one, I searched the names. Not all of them produced results. Many records from earlier decades had never been placed online, and some names were too common. But enough of them appeared. Missing hikers, drivers whose cars were found beside empty roads, young women who had never reached home, men who vanished during camping trips. People last seen in or near the Appalachian Mountains. Each disappearance occurred shortly before the matching date in Grandpa's guest book. I sat in front of the computer until morning. With every search, the memories of Grandpa's hunting stories became darker. One of the bastards almost got away, hunted him down all week, finally caught him. Got some nice steaks out of it, too. I remembered the bags he had given me. The steaks, the chops, the jerky, all those packages of unlabeled meat. I rushed to the freezer and pulled everything out. Most of what Grandpa had given me over the years was long gone. I had cooked it, served it to friends, and eaten it without a second thought. But one small package remained at the back beneath several bags of frozen vegetables. It was wrapped in white butcher paper. Grandpa's handwriting covered one side. There was no animal name, only a date. The date matched one of the final entries in the guest book. I dropped the package onto the floor. For most of my life, I believed hunting was one of the greatest joys my grandfather had. I believed he went into the forest to find deer. I believed the cabin was his peaceful escape. I believed the meat he gave me came from animals. Now I am no longer sure what I believe. My grandfather lived for 100 years. Everyone in our family thought we knew him. We laughed with him, listened to his stories, ate the food he prepared, and celebrated the long life he had lived. But whenever I think about the guest book, I remember something he told me shortly before he became too weak to hunt. He had smiled, placed his thin hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're the only one in this family who ever appreciated what I brought home." At the time, I thought he was thanking me for listening. Now, I think he may have meant something else. Story 3. The secret was to wake up slowly. She was always awake before him. In all the mornings they had spent inside that silent house, he had never managed to wake before her. She would sit in her little nest of blankets at the other end of the room, watching him with patient eyes. The words would already be waiting behind her lips, held there like a piece of candy she had been told not to eat yet. If he opened his eyes too quickly, the game would be ruined. So every morning he pretended to return from sleep one small piece at a time. First, he would move one shoulder. Then he would take a long, heavy breath. Sometimes he would shift his legs under the blanket or rub his face against the pillow. Finally, he would make a small frown, as though he were unhappy that sleep was letting him go. That was her signal. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she would whisper. She always whispered it with so much excitement that it sounded almost like a shout. It had become the happiest sound in their small world. He would slowly open his eyes and look around the room as if he were surprised to see daylight coming through the covered windows. "Is it morning already?" he would ask. She would nod seriously. like someone whose important job was to announce the beginning of each new day. Yes, it's morning. Then they would eat breakfast together. Most mornings, breakfast was oatmeal from the sack in the kitchen. The sack seemed to grow smaller every time he opened it. He tried not to look inside for too long. He would pour a little oatmeal into an old metal pot, add more water than he should, and heat it over the small camping stove near the back door. She always drank from the blue plastic cup because the blue cup belonged to her. There were other cups in the house, including 2 glass ones and a red plastic cup, but she refused to use them unless the blue one was dirty. He never argued. There were not many things left in the world that were truly hers. After breakfast came the rules. "Sing quietly so they don't hear me," she would say, repeating the words he had taught her. "If someone comes, hide under the stairs. Don't open the door, even if they use a nice voice. And what if the nice voice says, 'It's me'?" he would ask. "You knock the special knock." She would tap the table with her fingers. 2 quick knocks, a pause, then 3 slower ones. He would smile at her. "That's my girl." Before leaving, he always checked the doors and windows. The front door stayed locked. A heavy cabinet had been pushed against it months ago. The curtains remained closed, and blankets had been nailed over the larger windows to stop light from escaping at night. He left through the back door. He never looked up at the second-floor window. If he looked, he knew he would see her standing there with her small hand pressed against the glass. She would watch him leave until he disappeared between the houses. If he saw her, he might lose the strength to go. But if he did not go, they would not eat. The town gave them less every week. In the beginning, finding supplies had been easy. People had left homes full of canned food, bottled water, medicine, blankets, and clothes. Cars sat in driveways with keys still inside. Stores had been broken open, but there had been more food than anyone could carry. That had been a long time ago. Now the shelves were empty, the cars were rusting, and weeds had grown through cracks in the roads. Most nearby houses had already been searched. He had gone through every kitchen, pantry, garage, and basement within several streets of their home. The runs were getting longer. The houses behind the old school were the farthest ones he had not searched. He had saved them for last, because reaching them meant crossing open ground and passing close to places where the dead sometimes gathered. He worried about where he would search after those houses were empty, but he forced himself not to think too far ahead. The next problem could wait until after today's problem. He moved carefully through the streets, staying close to walls and fences. He slipped through broken hedges, crossed gardens filled with waist-high grass, and waited in the shadows before running across open roads. The world was quiet, but it was never peaceful. Somewhere in the distance, a loose metal sign moved in the wind. A bird called from the roof of an empty house. Rainwater dripped from a blocked gutter. Every small sound made him stop and listen. From the hill near the old water tower, he could sometimes see smoke rising far to the south. It was not the wild, broken smoke of a burning building or a fire spreading through dry grass. This smoke rose in a thin, straight line. It looked controlled, like smoke from a chimney. That meant people. He never stared at it for long. People could mean help, but they could also mean guns. They could mean hunger, fear, and desperate strangers who wanted whatever you carried. He had seen what frightened people could do long before the town had become completely empty. He owned very little now. A backpack, a flashlight, a knife, a few cans of food, a house that was slowly falling apart, and one little girl. She was the only thing he had left that someone could take from him. So each time he saw the smoke, he turned his back to it and continued in the opposite direction. He could not risk leading anyone home. The first house behind the school had a white kitchen with yellow flowers painted on the walls. Dust covered every surface, and mouse droppings filled the drawers. Most of the cabinets were empty. He searched quietly and found 2 jars of expired sauce, a bag of flour ruined by insects, and a can of soup swollen so badly that he did not dare touch it. Then, in a cupboard above the refrigerator, he found 3 cans of peaches and syrup. He held them against his chest for a moment. In another cabinet, hidden behind a stack of old plates, he found a jar of peanut butter. The seal was still unbroken. For a few seconds, he felt rich. He imagined the look on her face when he opened the peaches. She had not eaten anything sweet for weeks. He could almost hear her asking if she could drink the syrup from the bowl. He placed the food carefully in his backpack and continued searching. The garage smelled of damp wood, gasoline, and old dust. Shelves had fallen against one wall, spilling tools and boxes across the floor. Near the back, he saw a sealed case of bottled water trapped beneath a broken shelf. Water was heavy, but it was worth the effort. He set his flashlight on a workbench and pulled at the shelf. It moved slightly, but remained caught on something underneath. He crouched, reached into the dark space, and began dragging the case of water toward him. That was when the shadows beneath the workbench moved. At first, he thought it was a rat. Then a hand shot out and grabbed his sleeve. The fingers were gray and stiff, the nails broken and black. Before he could pull away, a face came out of the darkness. The mouth opened, and teeth closed around his forearm. The pain was sudden and clear. It was not like being cut or struck. It was the deep pressure of a mouth biting through cloth and skin, teeth grinding into muscle. The sound that came from him did not seem like his own voice. He grabbed the flashlight and swung it into the creature's head. The metal handle struck bone. The dead thing did not release him. It pulled harder, making wet, hungry sounds deep in its throat. He hit it again. And again. He kept swinging until the skull gave beneath the flashlight, and the teeth finally loosened. He pulled his arm free, fell backward, and kicked himself away across the dirty floor. The dead body remained half hidden beneath the workbench, one hand still opening and closing as if it were trying to catch him. He did not take the water. He ran. He ran through the house, out the broken back door, across a yard, and through a narrow alley. He did not stop when branches struck his face. He did not stop when his backpack banged painfully against his shoulders. He kept running until the school was behind him and the houses around him looked familiar. Only then did he stop. He leaned against a brick wall in the alley and tried to breathe. His hands were cold as he pushed his sleeve upward. There were 2 curved lines of broken skin on his forearm. Blood rose from the wounds in dark drops. The marks were neat and terrible, almost like someone had sewn a red mouth into his arm. Nothing else in the world left a mark like that. He did not lie to himself. He stood in the weak morning light and began counting time. A day, people had once said, sometimes 2. In the early months, when there had still been radio broadcasts and frightened voices giving instructions, they had warned everyone about bites. Fever could begin within hours. Confusion came next. Then, death. After death, the body rose again. If his own life had been the only one that mattered, he would have walked into the hills. He knew a place above the town where the land dropped away and the old highway could be seen in the distance. He would have sat there and watched the sky until he could no longer think. But she would wait for him. She would sit at the upstairs window with her hand against the glass, because waiting was what he had taught her to do. She would stay quiet. She would follow every rule. No living person knew she was inside that house. The same rules that had protected her would trap her. She would keep the door locked. She would hide from voices. She would not call out. She would wait for him until the food disappeared and the water ran out. Dying alone in the hills would be easy. It would only cause her to die more slowly. He looked south. He could not see the smoke from inside the alley, but he knew where it was. Morning after morning, he had turned his back on it because he refused to gamble with the only thing he could not survive losing. But a man with one day left had nothing left to gamble. He could walk south and find the people making that smoke. He would stay far away so he could not hurt them. He would show them the bite and tell them about the house. He would tell them about the little girl inside. He would explain the special knock. If they reached the house and knocked correctly, she might open the door. He had one night to prepare everything. He would put the food where she could reach it. He would fill every container with water. He would explain that his next trip might be longer than usual. Then, before sunrise, he would leave. He would have all day to walk south and make sure someone knew she existed. He pulled his sleeve down, picked up his backpack, and started home. By the time he reached the house, he was sweating. At the same time, he felt cold beneath the sweat. A thin rain had started halfway back, but he knew the weather was not the reason he was shivering. It was happening too quickly. The stories had said a day. He needed a day. He reached the back door and knocked twice, paused, and then knocked 3 times. For several seconds, there was no sound. Then, he heard her feet running down the stairs. It was the best sound left in the world. She unlocked the door and threw her arms around him before he was fully inside. He wanted to hold her tightly, but he kept his injured arm away from her body. "You were gone a long time," she said. "I know. I searched a new place. Did you find anything?" He smiled and opened the backpack. When she saw the peaches, her eyes became wide. "Are those for us?" "They are." Today? Today, he opened one can and poured the peaches into 2 bowls. He gave her more than half and kept the smaller amount for himself. She ate slowly at first, as though she was afraid the peaches might disappear. Then she began taking larger bites. When the fruit was gone, she lifted the bowl and drank the syrup. He watched her. He tried to remember everything about the moment. The way her hair fell across her face. The way she held the bowl with both hands. The small, happy sound she made when the sweetness reached her tongue. His injured arm had started to pulse. Each heartbeat brought another wave of pain. While she ate, he began preparing the house. He made the work look like normal cleaning so she would not ask too many questions. He carried canned food up from the cellar and placed it on the lowest kitchen shelf. He moved the oatmeal, peanut butter, and crackers there, too. He tied the can opener to the shelf with a piece of string so she could not lose it. He filled the bathtub with water. Then he filled every clean jar, bottle, bowl, and cooking pot he could find. He placed the blue cup beside them. He checked the locks twice. She followed him from room to room, talking about her day. A spider had come down the wall on a thin string while he was gone. It had stopped near the floor, hung there for a while, then climbed back up. "I think it changed its mind," she said. "Maybe it forgot something. Spiders don't forget things." "How do you know?" "Because they have lots of eyes." He laughed. The laugh turned into a cough. It came from deep inside his chest and would not stop. He turned away from her and covered his mouth. His whole body shook until the coughing passed. When he looked back, she was holding her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Your face is shiny," she said. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Your face is shiny. Daddy, I got wet in the rain, baby, that's all." She continued looking at him. Children could feel the shape of a lie even when they did not understand the words around it. He set the last can on the low shelf and tried to make his voice sound normal. "Tomorrow's run will be the longest one yet. I'll have to leave before you wake up." Her spoon lowered. "Before good morning? Just this once." She looked down at her empty bowl. "How long will you be gone?" "This one might take a couple of sleeps. 2, maybe 3. He forced a smile. "Not too many." Her eyes filled with worry. "You always come back before dark." "I know, but this place is far away, and I need to find more food." "Look, I put everything down here for you. If you get hungry, you can eat. You don't have to wait for me." She stared at the shelf. "You said I have to wait." "I know, but this time is different." "Why?" "Because you're getting older, and I know you can take care of yourself for a little while." That answer pleased her, but only slightly. "When you come back, can we do the puzzle?" He knew which one she meant. It was an old puzzle with a red barn, green fields, cows, and a blue tractor. Several pieces were missing, but she still loved putting it together. "The farm one?" he asked. She nodded. "The farm one. Yes, when I come back, we'll do the farm puzzle." The lie hurt more than his arm. That evening, he made her another small bowl of oatmeal. He added a spoonful of peanut butter, and she said it was the best dinner they had ever had. He could barely swallow his own food. The fever grew stronger after dark. He felt as though heat was trapped beneath his skin, while ice moved through his bones. The bite had swollen, and dark veins were spreading outward from it. He kept his sleeve pulled down. When it was time for bed, he helped her into her nest of blankets. She had built it in the safest corner of the room, far from the covered window. He tucked the blankets around her and sat beside her. "Tell me the rules," he said. She sighed sleepily. "Sing quietly, so they don't hear me. If someone comes, hide under the stairs. Don't open the door, even for a nice voice. What if the nice voice says it's me? You knock the special knock." Good, he brushed the hair away from her forehead. Again, she opened one eye. "Why?" "Just because, baby, so I know you know them." She repeated the rules. Then she repeated them a second time. Before falling asleep, she reached out and held one of his fingers. "You'll be careful tomorrow? Always you'll come back?" His throat tightened. "Go to sleep." She was too tired to argue. Within minutes, her breathing became slow and even. He sat beside her for a long time. He wanted to wake her and tell her the truth, but the truth would only frighten her. She would cry. She would hold on to him. She might follow him when he left. It was better for her to believe he was going on another supply run. He slowly pulled his hand from hers and moved to the mattress near the door. He sat with his back against the wall and placed his backpack beside him. A man sitting upright would not fall asleep. That was what he told himself. When the sky began to turn gray, he would leave through the back door. He would walk south toward the smoke. He would not look at the upstairs window. It would be the same as every other morning. Except this time, he would never return. The fever rose. Shivers came through him in long, slow waves. They felt like some huge creature turning beneath dark water. He pulled his knees toward his chest and held his arms tightly around them. This was too fast. It was hours earlier than the stories had promised. He began bargaining with his own body. First light. That was all he needed. One more gray morning. He only had to stand, open the door, and walk away before she woke up. He tried to keep his eyes open. The room moved around him. The walls seemed to lean forward and pull away. He heard sounds that were not there. Voices from years ago, cars on the road, a radio playing somewhere in another room. For one moment, he thought he heard her mother laughing in the kitchen. Then, the memory disappeared. He looked toward the blankets. His daughter was still asleep. He wanted to say her name, but he was afraid he would wake her. He wanted to tell her he loved her, but the words felt too large to pass through his throat. His head fell forward. He forced it back up. First light, he whispered. His eyes closed again. Just first light. Outside, the rain stopped. The room slowly became brighter in the ordinary way rooms always had, even at the end of the world. Something sat where the mattress met the wall. Its body had gone still. Its head rested against its chest. One arm lay across its knees, and the other hung at its side. The skin had lost its warmth. The breathing had stopped. For a while, it was only a dead thing. Then it became something else. Life returned to the body without breath, memory, or love. It came back slowly, like dirty water rising inside a deep well. The fingers moved first. Then the jaw. The head lifted slightly. It had no name for the house. It had no name for the blankets, the blue cup, the farm puzzle, or the special knock. It had no name for the small, warm shape sitting cross, legged only an arm's length away. She had woken early, as she always did. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, waiting patiently because waiting was what he had taught her to do. The thing smelled her before it hurt her. A shoulder moved beneath the dirty shirt. A frown crossed the gray face, as though sleep were something it did not want to give back. She smiled. Good morning, sleepyhead. Story 4. Space is like a sinkhole that never stops growing. It swallows everything that comes too close and carries it toward a place no one has ever seen. There is no known bottom, no clear destination, and no promise that anything taken by it will ever return. It is a fall into darkness without an end. For most of my life, I believed that darkness was the worst thing space could offer. I was wrong. My entire crew was dead, and whatever had killed them was coming for me next. The only thing protecting me was a thin, airtight metal door. It was not designed to stop monsters. It was meant to keep air inside the storage section of the ship. Still, it had become the closest thing I had to safety. I sat with my back against that cold door and remembered my father. When I was a child, he would take me outside late at night and point toward the stars. He showed me groups of stars and taught me their names. He told me that sailors had once used constellations to guide themselves across oceans. As long as you can see the stars, he would say, you can find your way home. His words had always made me feel safe. Whenever he spoke about the sky, it felt as if the universe was warm and welcoming. It felt alive in a gentle way, like it had been waiting for us to understand it. Now, the ship was my only constellation. It was the only thing guiding me through the endless dark. Unfortunately, the dream I had loved since childhood had become the worst nightmare I could ever imagine. Half of our ship, was gone. It had been torn apart so violently that the broken pieces were still drifting around us. Through the small porthole, I could see metal panels, wires, shattered equipment, and personal belongings floating away into space. Somewhere among those pieces were the bodies of my friends. I was lucky enough to be in the storage section when the attack happened. This part of the ship had survived, although it was badly damaged. The engines were useless, the navigation system barely worked, and every communication device had been destroyed. No one on my home world knew what had happened to us. No rescue team was coming. Before we left, we had been promised a safe journey. Our route had been studied for years. Scientists had checked every planet, every asteroid field, and every source of radiation they could find. They had told us that the greatest threats would be mechanical failure, lack of oxygen, or human error. No one had expected to find life hiding in the cracks of space. No one knew that creatures could move among the stars, hidden by darkness itself. The thing that attacked us was still nearby. I could feel that it was. Sooner or later, it would notice that I was alive. Then it would come knocking on my door. I had been drifting for several days. I could no longer remember exactly how many. The ship's clock had stopped working after the attack, and I had begun to lose track of time. My supplies were running low. Every day I counted the remaining food packs and water containers. I studied the ship's damaged plans and opened every manual I could find. I searched for a way to repair the communication system, restart the engines, or guide the broken ship toward a planet. Nothing worked. The engines were in the missing half of the ship. The main antenna was gone. Most of the power lines had been cut. Every plan ended in failure. Eventually, I stopped reading. I sat alone at the small kitchen table and wished I could hear another human voice. That was when someone whispered my name. Thomas. The voice was quiet, but it came from directly behind me. I jumped from my chair and turned toward the porthole. At first, I saw only stars and floating wreckage. Then, a face slowly moved into view. My body became stiff. One of my crewmates was floating outside the ship. His name was Daniel. His body had been torn into several pieces during the attack. I had seen him pulled through the broken front section of the ship. There was no possible way he could be alive. Yet there he was. His face was pale, and his eyes looked empty. There was no movement in his chest and no sign of life in his body. A dark wound crossed the side of his neck. Still, a small smile rested on his lips. "Thomas," he whispered again. The sound seemed to come through the glass, even though there was no air outside. My jaw tightened. My muscles refused to move. I could not look away from him. "Am I going crazy?" I asked. My own voice sounded unfamiliar. Daniel continued to smile. "He should be dead," I shouted, looking down at my trembling hands. "He is dead." When I looked back at the porthole, he was gone. There was nothing outside except the endless night. Tears filled my eyes. My chest tightened so badly that I thought my heart had stopped. I dropped onto the floor and curled into a ball, hoping the fear would pass. Instead, I closed my eyes and escaped into my memories. I thought about my family back home. I had joined this mission because I wanted to make history. I wanted my name to be remembered. More than anything, I wanted my parents to be proud of me. I had imagined returning home to cheering crowds. I had imagined walking into my parents' house wearing my uniform while my father smiled and told everyone that his son had crossed an entire solar system. I had never imagined that my final memory of them would be at the launch center. My mother had been crying. My father tried not to, but his eyes were wet. They both hugged me tightly before I entered the transport vehicle. At the time, I had felt excited. Now, I would have given anything to feel their warmth again. I must have fallen asleep on the floor because I suddenly woke to a sharp knock on the metal door. My eyes opened at once. The knock came again. 3 slow hits. I sat up and stared at the door. There should have been nothing on the other side. The section beyond it had been ripped open. There was no air, no heat, and no floor in many places. Then someone screamed, "Help me." The voice sounded weak and frightened. "It's so cold." I moved closer to the door, but did not touch it. "Who are you?" I shouted. "It's Chelsea," the voice answered. Her teeth seemed to chatter between every word. "Thomas, please open the door." My stomach twisted. Chelsea had been our medical officer. I had watched her die. "I saw your body," I said. "I watched you get pulled out of the ship." The knocking suddenly grew louder. "Let me in." 2 hands began hitting the door again and again. The metal shook under the force. "Please, Thomas, open it." I stepped backward. "This is a dream," I whispered. I pinched the skin of my arm until it hurt. Nothing changed. The knocking continued. "Am I already dead?" I asked myself. "Is this what death looks like?" I covered my ears and pressed my hands against the sides of my head. "Stop!" I screamed. "Please, stop!" The banging became faster. For several seconds, it sounded as if the entire ship was being struck by a giant hammer. Then it stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse. My ears rang. I remained on the floor, breathing heavily and staring at the door. Whatever was outside had been pretending to be Chelsea. I forced myself to stand and checked the remaining life monitor. Only one signal appeared. Mine. No one else was alive. I wondered whether the creature would ever learn to copy their voices perfectly. Would it remember the small details? Would Chelsea laugh in the same way? Would Daniel pause before speaking when he was nervous? Would I eventually become so lonely that I opened the door even if I knew it was a trap? My thoughts carried me back to the beginning of the mission. I had left home when I was only 18. I had become one of the youngest astronauts ever selected for a deep space journey. Our mission was supposed to cross several solar systems and prove that humans could travel farther than ever before. I had left behind the ordinary life my parents expected me to live. I had no spouse, no children, and no real plans for the future. Space was my future. The crew became my new family. Some of them were serious people who only cared about the mission. They followed every rule and spoke about work even during meals. Others knew how to relax. Those were the people I spent most of my time with. We played jokes on one another, shared stories, and stayed awake late playing cards. Chelsea always accused the winner of cheating, even when she had watched every move. They treated me like a younger brother. Back home, I had often been bullied. Other students pushed me into trash cans, laughed at my space books, and called me strange. They saw me as the quiet boy who sat alone in the corner of the lunchroom. The crew never treated me that way. For the first time in my life, I felt accepted. When the memories faded, I realized I was hungry. I opened one of the storage cabinets and reached for my last pack of freeze-dried strawberries. They had always been my favorite. Their sweet taste reminded me of summer mornings at home. Before I could open the package, a violent screech filled the ship. It came from every direction. The noise sounded like a woman screaming and an animal dying at the same time. I dropped the food and turned toward the door. A man was standing in front of it. There had been no sound of the door opening. He had simply appeared. His skin had been burned away, leaving wet muscle and exposed bone. His face was damaged beyond recognition, but I knew he had once been part of my crew. He lifted one arm and pointed at me. "Come with us," he said. His voice was wet and rough, like liquid moving through a damaged pipe. "How did you get in here?" I asked. I moved backward as quickly as I could. The figure stepped toward me. I tripped over a chair and fell to the ground. I crawled away until my back struck the wall. "I'm sorry," I cried. "I should have died with you." The figure continued to approach. I wish I had not survived. Tears fell from my face and landed on the floor. Then a hand closed around my shoulder. I raised my fist and turned, ready to strike. The screeching stopped. The room was empty. There was no body, no blood, and no hand on my shoulder. Only the fallen package of strawberries remained. I sat there for a long time, trying to understand what was happening. The mission had not gone according to plan because we had never prepared for the impossible. Space had hidden secrets from us. One of those secrets was life. Contrary to everything we believed, space seemed to have its own ecosystem. There were creatures living in the darkness between worlds. Some might have been small and beautiful, others were hunters. Whatever had attacked us belonged to the second kind. Perhaps space had hidden these creatures for their safety. Or perhaps it had hidden them for ours. I had always felt called by the stars. As a child, I would look up at them and imagine that they were guiding me toward my true purpose. Now, surrounded by darkness, I understood that beauty did not mean kindness. Space could be beautiful. It could also be cold, empty, and without mercy. I doubted that I would ever reach the destination I had dreamed about. Memories of the attack returned. It had started with a strange sound outside the ship. At first, we thought one of the engines was failing. The noise sounded like ocean waves breaking against the beach, mixed with a deep hum. For a few seconds, it felt as though our ship were sailing through water instead of moving through space. Then came a sound like a giant splash. Something struck the front of the ship. The impact threw me across the room. My shoulder hit the wall, and the entire ship changed direction. Warning lights flashed. Sirens filled the air. When I managed to stand, I looked through the nearest porthole. The front half of the ship had been torn apart. Large sections were spinning away in different directions. Wires and broken beams floated among the wreckage. Then I saw my crewmates. They were being pulled away from the ship. As their bodies touched a giant moving darkness, their flesh seemed to melt. They disappeared inside it. More impacts struck the ship. I hid behind a storage cabinet while metal broke around me. I knew that hiding would not save me, but fear had taken control of my body. When the noise stopped, I looked through the porthole again. The crew was gone. For one brief moment, I saw a large, pointed tail covered in scales moving through the dark. Then it disappeared. That was when I realized I was falling into a sinkhole with no end. I returned to the present when I heard scratching near the kitchen table. The noise moved slowly around the room. I stood and followed it. Thin marks began appearing on the floor, as if an invisible claw were cutting into the metal. The marks formed letters, Open the door before it gets you too. No, I screamed. Leave me alone. The scratching stopped. Who are you? I asked. My heart was beating so fast that it hurt. A voice came from behind me. You don't remember me? I turned. Josh was standing there. For a second, I forgot my fear. Josh, I whispered. Josh had been the funniest person on the ship. During meals, he would stick French fries into his nose and pretend to be a wise teacher. I will now share one of life's greatest secrets, he would say. Then he would tell us something obvious, like, do not chew with your mouth open. Most of the crew thought he was childish. I needed someone like him. He slowed everything down and reminded me that life did not always have to be serious. Josh also loved space as much as I did. He understood what it was like to look at the night sky and feel that something important was waiting there. Being his friend had repaired a part of me that had been broken for years. I reached toward him. Are you real? I asked. The moment my hand came close, his body began to change. His teeth grew longer and sharper. The skin on his face melted away. His arms stretched toward the floor, and his body became taller. Bones cracked inside him as he changed into something that was no longer human. I screamed and charged at it. My body passed straight through the creature. I landed on the floor and turned. It stood on the other side of the room, staring at me. Thick drool hung from its mouth. Then it bent backward in an impossible way and released a scream so loud that pain shot through my ears. Its body began to glow. The light became brighter and brighter until I had to cover my eyes. When the light faded, the creature was gone. I stayed on the floor, shaking. Does it play with your emotions? I asked myself. Does it use the people you love? Perhaps the creature had found me and was now trying to break my mind. Or perhaps I was losing control because of loneliness. Maybe damaged machinery was releasing chemicals into the air. Maybe a lack of oxygen was causing hallucinations. I needed answers. There was only one way to investigate. I had to open the metal door. I put on my spacesuit carefully. I checked every seal, connection, and air supply twice. Then I tied a safety rope around the strongest part of my suit and attached the other end to the ship. I stood in front of the door controls. My hand froze above the button. I could feel cold moving through my fingers even before I opened the door. I placed one hand and my helmet against the metal. Then I whispered a prayer. I pressed the button. The air pressure changed at once. The door opened, revealing the deepest darkness I had ever seen. I climbed outside. For a moment, I simply held onto the ship and looked around. A glowing butterfly floated past me. Its wings changed through every color of the rainbow. It moved gently through space, leaving small waves of light behind it. I watched until it disappeared into the dark. It was beautiful. It was proof that not everything living in space was cruel. I began climbing along the side of the ship. A large piece of metal suddenly flew over my head. It missed my helmet by only a few inches. I turned quickly and searched for more wreckage. Nothing else was close. I continued forward. Deep claw marks covered the ship. Large dents had crushed several outer panels. No ordinary collision could have caused that damage. Something powerful had attacked us. I kept moving until my safety rope became tight. At first, I thought it had caught on part of the ship. Then, I looked back. The rope was rubbing against a sharp piece of broken metal. Its surface was beginning to split. I crawled toward it, but I was too late. The rope snapped. The loose end floated away from the ship. A piece of wreckage caught it and began pulling. My hands tightened around the outer handles. Pain moved through my arms. My head began to pound. The rope pulled harder. "Join us, Thomas," a voice cried from somewhere in the dark. My fingers began to slip. "You are not my friends," I shouted. "You are only copying them." The pulling suddenly stopped. I remained hanging there, unable to move. Sweat filled my suit, fogging the inside of my helmet. Slowly, I pulled myself back toward the open door. I had almost reached it when I heard the sound of waves. The deep hum returned. Then came the splashing, the same sounds I had heard before the attack. I climbed faster. The darkness around me moved. Just before I reached the doorway, everything went black. Hot air surrounded my suit. Huge teeth closed around me. The space inside was wet, warm, and filled with a terrible smell. Am I being eaten? I thought. The creature had returned. It had finally caught me. Space itself was swallowing me. I could not see anything. I was falling through an endless tunnel inside the creature. Between sections of complete darkness, I saw clusters of stars. They formed constellations I had never seen before. Perhaps the creature was moving through space faster than any ship. Perhaps its body connected distant parts of the universe. My eyes closed. Memories flashed through my mind. My parents taking me to space museums. My sister and I pretending to be astronauts. The two of us running through the yard, fighting invisible aliens. The first time I looked through a telescope and saw a distant star with my own eyes. My parents hugging me before the launch. It ends here. I cried. I'm still just the kid in the corner of the lunchroom with space books. Then I hit something wet. My body struck water. When I opened my eyes, I saw blue sky and white clouds above me. For several seconds, I could not understand what I was seeing. I was floating in an ocean. "Where am I?" I whispered. Boats surrounded me. People stood on their decks, pointing weapons and shouting. "Identify yourself." Their voices came from every direction. The language sounded strange, but I understood some of it. It was an ancient language I had studied from old books. Scholars on my world had only partly translated it. No one knew who had created it or where it came from. I tried to answer, but I could not speak. My mind became foggy. My vision blurred. Several people pulled me from the water and carried me onto one of the boats. "He may have a concussion," someone said. They removed my helmet. Fresh air entered my lungs. It was the first natural air I had breathed in months. For one hopeful moment, I wondered if I had finally found my way home. Maybe my father had been right. Maybe the strange constellations inside the creature had guided me back. The people kept speaking, but the pain in my head became stronger. Their voices faded. The last thing I remembered clearly was the boat approaching a large piece of land. They took me to a guarded building surrounded by high fences. Armed patrols watched every gate. No one would explain where I was or how I had arrived. I looked at the night sky from the window of the room where they kept me. The constellations were different. None of them matched the stars above my home. That was when I understood the truth. The creature had not brought me back. This planet was not my world. The people here called it Earth. Story 5. When I was in my 20s, I lived alone for a while in a small apartment complex. Looking back now, that apartment was probably my favorite place I have ever lived. It was not large or expensive, and there was nothing especially modern about it, but I had made it feel completely mine. I had decorated the entire place in a warm bohemian style before that kind of design became popular. Most of the furniture was made of wood, and nearly everything was covered in soft, earthy colors. There were shades of brown, dark green, faded orange, and cream throughout the rooms. I had pieces of driftwood on the shelves, handmade decorations hanging from the walls, small candles placed on tables, and plants wherever I could fit them. Some of the plants were real, and some were fake, because I was terrible at remembering to water them. Still, they gave the apartment a peaceful feeling. Wooden bead curtains hung in two of the doorways, and they made a soft clicking sound whenever I walked through them. At night, I would light a few candles, turn on a small lamp, and sit in the living room while music played quietly in the background. It felt safe. It felt calm. Most of all, it felt like home. There was only one thing about the apartment that I hated. The building had 2 floors, and my apartment was on the second one. Instead of having an indoor hallway, the second-floor apartments opened onto a long outdoor walkway. The walkway passed directly in front of every apartment door and every balcony. Each apartment had a small balcony that connected to that shared walkway. There was a short metal gate between the balcony and the walkway, but the gate did not have a lock. Anyone walking past could open it and step onto the balcony. My balcony was directly outside the kitchen and dining area. A large sliding glass door separated the balcony from the inside of my apartment. The door had a lock, of course. I checked it every night. Sometimes I checked it more than once. Still, the lock never made me feel completely safe. Every night, when I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about that sliding glass door. It was nothing more than a large piece of glass. If someone truly wanted to get inside, all they had to do was break it. That thought stayed in the back of my mind constantly. During the day, it did not bother me as much. The complex was usually busy. Neighbors walked along the shared walkway, children played outside, and people came and went from their apartments. The sound of cars, voices, and doors opening made the building feel active and normal. At night, however, the whole place changed. The walkway became quiet. The courtyard lights cast long shadows across the building, and every sound seemed louder than it should have been. Footsteps outside my apartment would make me stop whatever I was doing and listen. If someone paused near my door or balcony, my heart would begin to race. Pets were not allowed in the complex, so getting a large dog was not an option. I would have loved to have had one. Even a friendly dog would have made me feel less alone. But the landlord was strict about the rule, and I could not risk being thrown out. I had grown up around hunting and guns. My family knew how to use them safely, and I had been taught from a young age to respect them. But at the time, I was a broke woman in my 20s. I could barely afford rent, food, electricity, and gas for my car. Buying a gun never even crossed my mind. Instead, I kept an old kitchen knife under my bed. It was not a good knife. The handle was scratched. The blade was dull, and there were small spots of rust near the edge. I had taken it from the kitchen because it was the only thing I owned that made me feel as though I could defend myself. Every night before I went to sleep, I pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door. Every single night. The dresser was heavy, but I had done it so many times that I knew exactly how to move it. I would grab the side, lift slightly, and drag it across the floor until it blocked the door. In the morning, I would move it back again. It became part of my routine. Lock the front door. Lock the sliding glass door. Check the windows. Turn off the lights. Place the knife under the bed. Push the dresser in front of the bedroom door. Only then could I try to sleep. Looking back now, I realize how sad that was. No one should have to live like that. Home is supposed to be the place where you feel safest, but I spent most nights preparing for someone to break in. At the time, though, it felt normal. If a friend stayed over, I slept better. If I had company late into the evening, I felt less nervous. But when I was alone, which was most nights, fear always returned as soon as the apartment became quiet. I tried to tell myself that I was being unreasonable. I lived in a decent neighborhood. Nothing serious had ever happened in the complex. My neighbors seemed friendly, and the landlord had never warned me about any danger. Still, fear does not always listen to reason. One night, sometime after midnight, I woke up feeling thirsty. The apartment was completely dark, except for a faint line of light coming from beneath my bedroom door. One of the outdoor lights on the walkway was shining through the living room and reaching all the way down the hall. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Usually I brought a bottle of water into the bedroom before moving the dresser. I hated leaving the room after I had barricaded myself inside. Once the dresser was in place, I wanted to stay there until morning. Of course, that was the one night I had forgotten the water. My mouth felt dry, and the longer I thought about it, the thirstier I became. For a full minute, I considered ignoring it. I told myself I could wait until morning. A few hours without water would not hurt me. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. It did not work. My throat felt dry, and I could not stop thinking about the glass of cold water waiting in the kitchen. Finally, I sighed and sat up. The room was silent. I reached beneath the bed and wrapped my hand around the handle of the kitchen knife. The metal felt cold and slightly rough in my palm. I got out of bed and moved toward the dresser. Even then, part of me felt ridiculous. I was only going to the kitchen for a drink of water. There was no reason to carry a knife through my own apartment. But I carried it anyway. I pulled the dresser away from the door just far enough to create a narrow opening. Then I turned sideways and squeezed through. The hallway outside my bedroom was dark. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing, no voices, no footsteps, no strange sounds. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, holding the knife close to my side. The wooden bead curtain between the hallway and living room clicked softly as I passed through it. That small sound made me jump. I almost laughed at myself, but I could not relax. The apartment felt different at night. Familiar objects became dark shapes, and every shadow looked as if it might move. I entered the kitchen and reached toward the light switch, but then stopped. Turning on the light would make it easier for someone outside to see me through the sliding glass door. I knew the blinds were closed, but there were small gaps between them. I decided to leave the lights off. The sliding glass door was on the other side of the dining area. Long vertical blinds hung in front of it. They were pale in color during the day, but at night they looked gray and almost silver in the faint light coming from outside. The air conditioner was running. Whenever it turned on, the air moved through the apartment and caused the vertical blinds to sway gently. They would slide against one another with a soft tapping sound. They were moving that night, just as they always did. At first, nothing seemed unusual. I walked toward the sink and reached for a glass. Then, the blinds shifted again. For a second, I thought I saw something behind them. I froze It was only a dark shape. I could not tell what it was. The balcony was poorly lit, and the blinds kept moving in front of the glass. I stared at the shadow, trying to understand what I was seeing. Maybe it was a plant. Maybe it was one of the balcony chairs. Maybe the outdoor light was making a strange reflection on the glass. I rubbed my eyes with my free hand and looked again. The blinds swayed apart. The shape was still there. It was tall, much taller than a chair. My stomach tightened. I stopped breathing. The shape did not move. It stood directly outside the sliding glass door, hidden behind the blinds in the darkness. For one confused moment, I wondered whether one of my neighbors had walked onto the wrong balcony. Maybe someone had been drinking and had made a mistake. Then the blinds shifted again, and I saw what looked like a shoulder. Someone was standing outside my apartment. Before I could react, a deafening sound exploded through the room. Bang! The sliding glass door shook inside its frame. Someone had slammed into it. It was not a knock. It was not a hand touching the glass. It was not someone accidentally bumping into the door. It sounded as though the person had thrown their entire body against it, using their shoulder to force it open. The sound was so loud that it seemed to shake the whole apartment. I screamed. The figure outside suddenly stopped moving. For a second, everything became completely still. The blinds continued swaying gently, brushing against one another as if nothing had happened. My mind tried to understand the situation all at once. Someone was on my balcony. Someone had tried to force open the sliding door. My phone was still in my bedroom. The dresser was blocking most of the bedroom door. The front door was on the other side of the apartment. I was standing in the kitchen with nothing but a rusty knife. My heart was beating so hard that it hurt. I could hear blood rushing in my ears. My hands began shaking, and the knife trembled in front of me. I raised it anyway. The person outside probably could not see me through the blinds, but I wanted them to know I was not helpless. People often say that you never know whether you will fight, run, or freeze until something dangerous happens. Over the years, I have learned that my first instinct is usually to fight. That night, however, it felt like my body was trying to do all three things at once. My feet were frozen to the floor. My mind was screaming at me to run. But my hand lifted the knife, and I began shouting, "I have a knife! Go away! I have a knife!" My voice cracked. I sounded more terrified than threatening, but I kept yelling, "I'll mess you up. Get away from my door." The figure did not move. That terrified me even more. If it had been a drunk neighbor or someone who had made a mistake, they would have apologized. They would have backed away. They would have said something. The person outside said nothing. They remained completely still behind the blinds. I could barely breathe. My chest felt tight, and each breath came out in short, painful gasps. I remember thinking that I was hyperventilating so badly that I might pass out. I imagined myself falling unconscious on the kitchen floor. I imagined the person breaking through the glass while I was helpless. The thought filled me with a sudden burst of anger. I stomped my foot against the floor and screamed louder. "Go away. I'll stab you. I swear I'll stab you." By then, I was crying so hard that I could barely speak. My words came out broken and unclear. Tears blurred my vision, and the shape outside seemed to move, even though I could not tell whether it actually did. I kept the knife pointed toward the door. "Get away from me." The figure still did not respond. I stopped trying to form proper sentences. I just screamed. I screamed as loudly as I could, over and over again. I wanted every neighbor in the complex to hear me. I wanted the person outside to believe I was dangerous. I wanted them to think I was willing to do anything. Most of all, I wanted them to leave. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then, finally, the person seemed to wake from whatever strange state they were in. I heard a small scraping sound near the sliding door. It sounded like a hand releasing the handle. That detail has always stayed with me. The person had not simply thrown themselves against the glass. They had been holding the door handle. They had been trying to slide it open. The lock must have stopped them. A second later, I heard quick footsteps on the balcony. The small metal gate rattled as they pushed through it. Then the footsteps moved on to the shared walkway. They ran. I listened as the sound grew softer and finally disappeared. Even after they were gone, I kept screaming. I could not stop. My body had taken control, and the fear needed somewhere to go. I stood in the kitchen, holding the knife toward an empty balcony, screaming until my throat hurt. After another minute or two, all the strength left my legs. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The knife slipped from my hand and clattered against the tile beside me. Looking back, I am amazed I did not cut myself. I could easily have fallen onto the blade, but somehow it landed a few inches away. I curled up on the floor and cried. I do not know how long I stayed there. It might have been 5 minutes. It might have been 20. Time felt strange. I kept staring toward the sliding glass door, expecting the person to return. Every time the blinds moved, I thought I saw the shadow again. I was afraid to approach the door. I was afraid to look outside. I was also afraid to turn my back on it. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My legs were shaking so badly that I had to hold on to the counter. I picked up the knife and slowly moved back toward the hallway. The apartment was still dark. I passed through the wooden bead curtain, and the clicking sound made me flinch again. I hurried toward the bedroom, squeezed through the gap beside the dresser, and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. I should have called the police first. I know that now. But the first person I called was my dad. He lived about 3 hours away. There was nothing he could do for me in that moment, but I did not care. I just wanted my father. The second he answered, I started crying again. At first, he could not understand what I was saying. I was speaking too quickly and struggling to breathe. He kept telling me to slow down. Take a breath, he said. Tell me what happened. I told him someone had been on my balcony. I told him they had tried to force the sliding glass door open. I told him I had screamed and threatened them with a knife. He stayed calm, even though I could hear fear and anger in his voice. He told me to call the police. He stayed on the phone while I did it. The police arrived and checked the walkway, the balcony, and the area around the apartment building. By then, the person was gone. There were no cameras in the complex. I had not seen a face. I could not tell them how tall the person was, what clothes they were wearing, or whether they were male or female. All I had seen was a dark shape behind moving blinds. The officers took my statement and told me to keep the door locked. They suggested placing something in the track so the sliding door could not move even if someone broke the lock. After they left, I called my dad again. He stayed on the phone with me for the rest of the night. I never went back to sleep. I sat on my bed with a rusty knife beside me and listened to every sound outside. Whenever footsteps passed on the walkway, my whole body tensed. Morning seemed to take forever, As soon as the sun came up, the apartment looked normal again. Light filled the kitchen. The plants, candles, driftwood decorations, and wooden furniture all looked exactly as they had the day before. But the feeling of the apartment had changed. For the first time, it no longer felt like home. It felt like a place someone had tried to enter. My dad arrived later that morning after driving 3 hours to reach me. The moment I saw him, I started crying again. He hugged me and then immediately went to inspect the sliding glass door. He checked the lock, the frame, the handle, and the balcony gate. There was no serious damage, but there were a few marks near the door handle and along the frame. We could not prove when they had been made, but I was certain they had not been there before. My dad drove me to a hardware store and bought a security bar made for sliding glass doors. It was a strong metal bar that rested in the track and prevented the door from sliding open. He showed me how to place it correctly and tested it several times. With the bar in place, the door barely moved. I do not know whether it would have stopped someone who was determined enough. A person could still break the glass. They could still find another way inside. But it made me feel slightly safer. My dad also checked every window and lock in the apartment. He walked around the complex, spoke to a few neighbors, and asked whether anyone had seen or heard something during the night. One neighbor said she had heard screaming, but had been too afraid to open her door. Another neighbor said he had heard someone running down the walkway, but he had not looked outside in time to see them. No one had a useful description. I reported the incident to my landlord as well. Unfortunately, there was not much the landlord or police could do. There were no security cameras, no clear fingerprints, no damage serious enough to provide evidence, and no description of the person. All I had was my story. The landlord promised to remind residents to keep the balcony gates closed and to report suspicious people. He also said he would consider installing better lights along the walkway. I do not remember whether he ever did. For the rest of my lease, I became even more careful. I checked the sliding glass door lock several times each night. I placed the security bar in the track and pulled on the door to make sure it would not move. I kept the blinds tightly closed, and I avoided going into the kitchen late at night. I also started keeping my phone beside me at all times. The rusty knife remained under my bed. The dresser still blocked my bedroom door. I wanted to leave the apartment immediately, but I could not afford to break the lease. Moving required money I did not have. I would have needed to pay a deposit somewhere else, rent a truck, and possibly lose the deposit on my current apartment. So I stayed. Oddly enough, I still loved the apartment complex. I loved the neighborhood. I loved the trees around the parking area and the way the courtyard looked in the morning. I liked most of my neighbors, and I liked how close the complex was to the places where I worked and shopped. When my lease finally ended, I did not move far away. I moved into another apartment in the same complex. The new apartment did not have a balcony connected to the shared walkway. Its windows faced a private area, and no one could walk directly up to the sliding glass door. That one difference was enough for me. I never discovered who had been standing outside my apartment that night. Maybe it was someone looking for an easy place to rob. Maybe it was a drunk person who had chosen the wrong apartment. Maybe it was someone who had watched me and knew that I lived alone. That possibility still frightens me the most. The person did not knock. They did not call out.